if Speaker Johnson looks me in the eye and says something, I expect him to follow through on it. And if he looks me at the eye and I say something, I got to follow through on it, because I just think that's the way it works best in terms of advancing what we need to do. I think that we have the ability to get a lot of wins, but I'm going to define wins a little differently.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sitdown, but before we get to the interview, we'd love it if you'd hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review, because we love your feedback. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works and how to affect real change. Without further ado, here's the interview. Congressman Andy Harris, welcome to the Signal Sitdown.
Good to be with you.
So, we only have a short period of time, because you got to get your butt back across the street to go vote on some things. Later this evening, we're recording this right before the House will vote on this clean CR. Mm-hmm. Obviously, conservatives don't like voting for CRs, but I think it's the conversation that we can have that I think is most useful to our listeners is how we got here. So let's do a retrospective of this conference. Take me back to January of 2023 in the speaker's fight. That seemed like conservatives really asserting themselves.
It was, and we got several rule changes, both to the conference rules and to the House rules that were very important. We got commitments from former Speaker McCarthy, again, to proceed regular order on our appropriations bills, a commitment to bring appropriations bills up. When he was deposed and Mike Johnson became Speaker, again, a commitment to go through the normal appropriations process. So this time, for the first time in years, we got all 12 appropriations bills through the committees, good conservative House appropriations bills. All of them passed with really only Republican votes. Democrats wouldn't vote for them because they were conservative. Got 5 through the floor, looked across the Capitol at the Senate, which put none on the floor because Chuck Schumer wants to do an omnibus in a smoke-filled room where he controls everything. He piles everything into it, sends it over to the House to say, pass this, no amendment process. And to his credit, we have a speaker now who said, no, we're not going to have an omnibus bill just before Christmas. And I think that that's because of what the conservatives have insisted throughout the 118th Congress, starting in the speaker fight in January 2023, but then continuing through this Congress to hold Speaker Johnson now to his word that he says, well, no, we're not going to do a minibus, an omnibus. In fact, yesterday he came out and said, no buses at all. We're going to try to get this thing done. Separate appropriations bills. Again, look, if we had to package a couple of good appropriations bills together and pass it in one floor, I'm not against that. The idea is you don't put a whole big package together. Again, done in a smoke-filled room somewhere, no amendments allowed, and then put all kinds of other bills on top of it. That's what the omnibus bill has come, what we call the Christmas omnibus bill, because it's like every Christmas, it comes just like Christmas every year.
Right, trillions of dollars to government and all of its cronies. Yeah. Take us into a little bit more of that omnibus process. That ended up, that smoke-filled room, backroom deal structure of government that has dominated Washington for such a long time really ended up being Speaker McCarthy's downfall in some ways, right? When he goes to negotiate with the debt ceiling with President Biden, and then we get to that appropriations period, no movement at all by the Senate, forces some political brinksmanship and forces, Speaker McCarthy to go into those smoke-filled rooms and negotiate the kind of spending that leadership wants to see. Now, Johnson says, no buses. We're not going to do buses. How can conservatives strengthen Johnson's hand, strengthen other conservatives' hands in preventing that? Because Johnson may say no buses, but in the leadership room, when it's 3v1, because I'm kind of counting McConnell on the side of Schumer and Jeffries at this point. Right. What can Johnson do when you have 3 out of the 4 leaders blaming you and your conference for a government shutdown or for whatever happens around Christmas time?
Sure. So look, the big unknown here and what will be resolved by the election is what is Congress going to look like and the White House going to look like in January. So if the Republicans retain the House, capture the Senate and the White House, it becomes a completely different situation where the Speaker is now, yes, he's 1 against 3, but in the background is the 119th Congress and a Trump presidency, where if President Trump comes and says, look, you kick this all into my administration, we're going to cut $100 billion, from what the Senate is demanding right now. If we do that, then I think that can get done. So his hand and the strength of his hand to some extent is going to depend on what the outcome of the election is. But we have to, as conservatives, we have to keep on pushing to say, look, we cannot tolerate a $36 trillion federal debt, a $2+ trillion a year federal deficit. This is unbelievable. I mean, our deficit is larger than our entire defense budget plus Social Security put together. I mean, it's completely not sustainable. So we have to continually be in the fight to bring government spending down into what I call fiscal sanity. I mean, if you talk to any American, go, how long can we sustain a $2 trillion a year deficit? I mean, the average person go, well, probably not too long. It sounds like a lot of money. Yeah, it's a lot of money. It's not sustainable. So we have to constantly be, and again, that's one of the purposes of the Freedom Caucus is constantly be pushing the conference toward this idea of let's restore fiscal sanity, and it is a constant fight. Yeah. You can't let your shoulder off that boulder for a minute.
I do want to go back to those concessions scored. We had the Weaponization Committee created in Congress. I think a lot of conservatives are really, really happy about that. But beneath the tangible deliverables on policy, right? The structure in which conservatives forced Johnson to arrange committees, right? More representation on the Rules Committee in particular, more representation on the House Foreign Affairs Committee because of the divide between some of the Ukraine hawks and the Ukraine skeptics, right? Getting that representation for conservatives was important to those holdouts, of which you were one for, I believe, 12 out of the 15 rounds or something like that, right? That you needed to pull all of that out of leadership if leadership wasn't going to give it to you. I bring that back up because we now head for another rules fight, regardless of how things shake out come November 5th, right? If Freedom Caucus, for example, increases their representation, then maybe conservatives have a stronger hand. Obviously, all of this is only contingent on conservatives, Republicans keeping the House. But when we head into that fight, you recently became the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. Is House Freedom Caucus going to be maneuvering similarly to get those types of concessions? Do you think moderates in the Republican Party are upset at how the House Freedom Caucus has operated throughout this Congress and wants to kind of cut you guys out of the picture in any way, shape, any way that they can? Do they want to cut you out? I mean, and if they do want to cut you out, how do you counteract that?
Sure. So look, those discussions have already begun. I firmly believe that there can be no backsliding on any of the concessions made in January 2023. And people say, well, but then, the majority of the conference will vote to remove some of those concessions. Well, but then we, in the context that we had a speaker fight in January 2023, we could have a speaker fight in January 2025. Look, I'm a total realist. We have, I guess our margin today is, 220 to 212. So we have 8, if 4 seats flip, we're even, okay? If we have a good night on election night, I can't imagine our margin being more than 15 seats, 20 seats tops. Well, you only have 20-seat margin, 10 people defect, and you got a speaker fight. So I think that in the context that a speaker fight has occurred, a lot of the same people are still there. I think that the conference will realize it cannot go back on some of those on those rule concessions that we got, and perfect examples are that we got the extra members on the Rules Committee. We did get
and just I'm sorry to interrupt you, but really quick for those at home, what does the Rules Committee do?
Okay,
right? I didn't ask you that up front.
You're absolutely right.
But this is one of the most fundamental institutions on how the House operates, and no one in the corporate media wants to talk about it. Most people at home don't know what it is.
They don't understand it. I mean, everybody thinks, a bill comes, it gets written, goes to a committee, gets passed, then goes to the floor and we vote on it. No, there's one important step that we're leaving out, the Rules Committee. And the Rules Committee, of course, decides, and if a bill doesn't go to the Rules Committee, it doesn't go to the floor. It decides what amendments are allowed. It decides, the structure of the debate on the bill, but most importantly, what amendments are allowed. So obviously, in the past, it was called the Speaker's Committee because the Speaker appoints everyone to the committee. And in the past, everyone did exactly what the Speaker wanted. And we got 3 members on who sometimes don't feel like they have to do. If the Speaker's making a wrong decision, we have 3 members on there now who are willing to say that emperor has no clothes. This bill can't come to the floor the way it is. And because there are 4 Democrats on the committee, if those 4 Democrats join with those 3 Republicans, they are the majority. So it's kind of a check and balance on the power and the ability of the Speaker alone to completely control the structure and debate on a bill and the amendment process. Incredibly important. The amendment process is important. Look, people want us to fight. When a bad bill comes out, they want us to put an amendment on the floor and put everybody on record on it. And that's so important.
And that reflects back on how business has been done in Washington for far too long, right? Speaker has complete power, complete authority. Now, that's a little bit different for the House than the Senate, where the Senate minority rights are a little bit more pronounced. In the House, a little less, right? It's more about the majority ruling. And when we look at institutions like the Rules Committee, you go, I see it now. I see how we get into a position where government is run by leadership when intra-party fights, whether that's the Democrats or the Republicans, aren't held in a fair manner, right? Yeah. And so with this representation on the Rules Committee from conservatives in particular, you see, okay, this is how the American people claw back a little bit more of their government. Am I getting that wrong?
No, that's right. It makes it a little more what people understand a democratic process to be, which is, actually, 435 members are in the House. They all can offer amendments. Like, we obviously can't take up every amendment, but as an example, in this past Congress, we totaled it up, and I think we had over 2,000 amendments made in order. As opposed to, I think, 600 or 700 in the last Congress. I mean, when we made this change, it tremendously expanded the number of amendments came to the floor. Now, they didn't all pass. In fact, a lot of them didn't. But we had a vote on it. The American people can go, that spending cut, my Republican rep didn't vote for it. But we put that Republican rep on record, And so now we know who is supporting spending cuts, who's not supporting spending cuts. And that kind of transparency, I think, is important. But frequently what Washington wanted to hide, let's not put anybody on the record. Oh, my God, it could threaten their reelection. Well, if they're voting against conservative principles and they're running on a Republican ticket, they got to explain that, in the next primary election.
Right. And the House, as we said, majority rules. You guys get to create your own rule book, essentially.
You do.
And that's how things are governed.
That's right.
But obviously, this was never meant to be an institution where Machiavellian-type politics dominates. I mean, this is about you're called a representative for a reason, right? The people should be included in that process, at least feel like they're being represented in that process. And that process for far too long, the creation of rules, retooling how government is done in Washington has used, we call it the uniparty for a reason, right? Yeah. They've been employed to serve the uniparty and its interests. In this new role as House Freedom Caucus chair, you come in with a little bit of chaos on the leadership front, frankly, from the conference, from that caucus this year. What's your relationship like with the rest of your colleagues? What are your priorities as you look forward as the House Freedom Caucus?
Look, when people write about me and they wrote about my elevation to the chairmanship, everybody said, well, he's the fiscal conservative, one of the fiscal conservatives or most fiscally conservative members of the Appropriations Committee. Mm-hmm. I don't hide that, and my colleagues on the Appropriations Committee, I do the work. I am a fiscal conservative. I'm chair of one of the subcommittees. We produce a pretty fiscally conservative bill. They're all right with that because I work with other people, but always driving things toward fiscal conservatism. But I'll work with them to get there. I won't compromise. I'll work with them.
I just want to say there's an old joke in Washington. There's Republicans and there's Democrats and then there's appropriators. That's so for the folks that aren't at home, it's rare to have someone as fiscally conservative as you represented on any type of Appropriations
correct.
Committee,
Any
type of subcommittee.
Until I got appointed, there was no member of the Freedom Caucus. Then we had one other member, Ben Klein, appointed 2 years ago. And then, of course, after the Speaker fight, we had 2 other members. So we now have 4 members of the Freedom Caucus on the Appropriations Committee. Well, and again, all probably, look, Republicans are generally fiscally conservative. We 4 are the most fiscally conservative on the committee. And you pull the committee that way. And if you do your work, you make the argument for why that spending, we don't need that spending, which may have been in the budget for a decade. And we're like, wait a minute, why are we spending money on that? But nobody's ever asked. But if you ask, everybody's, oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, we could probably cut that. But it needs to be asked. It needs to be someone who's willing to go in there and say, look, we have to control federal spending. It's not business as usual, where you take last year's budget and that becomes the baseline for next year's budget. No, you should go to zero. It's like, zero-based budgeting. We have to justify everything in the budget. And it's got to the point, and the 4 of us, I think, view the budget that way. It's like you have to justify everything in that budget. Now, the budget is so large that it's actually hard to see everything that's in that budget and to know. So it can take years. I'd like to get another member of the Freedom Caucus on the House Appropriations Committee, to be honest with you. I think we need to be represented on all the subcommittees, where at least you have one member on every subcommittee who says, hold on a second, I was looking through this budget, and I'll pull an example from 14 years ago. We have $1 million a year subsidy on mohair that was instituted in World War II when we needed to make uniforms that literally persisted until 2011. Like literally until my first year in the House, that subsidy persisted, $1 million a year from World War II until that point in time.
Because the dirty little secret is no one reads the damn thing. Because it's too
long. Right.
It's too large, too obtuse.
You have a multi-billion-dollar budget, and it's a $1 million subsidy. It's like, well, nobody pays attention to it.
Right.
But that's what we got to do for the American people. When I tell that story, American people are like, what is mohair? First of all, what's mohair? And we're subsidizing it. So, but you got to have the people who are willing to go and look at that.
Yeah, $1 million for mohair. Hey, what if you just gave $1 million to something else? I think a lot of people think $1 million is a lot of money, but it looks like pennies in the bucket when you look at the size of federal government and the amount of money these people are trying to manage. That's one of the main reasons why cutting government spending. There's so much waste. Cutting government spending is so important because all of the funds that we lose in that process, all of the productive capacity that we lose. We do not have a democracy if, 1, government doesn't represent the people's desires, and 2, if that government loses track of those desires and has no idea where this money is going, right? Because at the end of the day, it's their votes, but it's also their money.
Yes, and people should, and that's, you put it right. Congress spends other people's money. We have to realize there are other people. There are taxpayers there. Perfect example is, they want to spend $2 billion on the Key Bridge rebuilding. Look, terrible accident. There's some ship, knocks down the bridge and it's important, but they want $2 billion. And, I was sitting around last week thinking, like, wait a minute. Why don't we find the $2 billion somewhere? Because they wanted this emergency spending above the caps, like, this terrible tragedy. I'm like, no, why don't we find the $2 billion somewhere else? So we're going to look at, for instance, cutting electric vehicle subsidies to pay for the bridge. Right. And you're like, the American people have already decided electric vehicles, that's not really a good idea. Even the people who bought them, a large percent of them like, I wish I didn't make that decision. Wish the government didn't, encourage me to make that decision. So let's take some of that money and build the bridge. Not new spending. It's like, you can take the $1 million mohair. It's like, you could take that and spend it somewhere much more usefully instead of just adding another $1 million somewhere else and keeping the mohair. Yeah. That's the first step we got to do. Is let's make sure that we're eliminating the spending that's not necessary, and then redistributing that, to defense, for instance. Look, we got to have defense spending, but non-defense spending, no, we should freeze non-defense spending. Should we increase defense spending? Yeah, but we might go and find the money somewhere else. It might be electric vehicle, monies. It could be, clean energy subsidies that make no sense. Offshore wind, a big issue in my district. It's a stupid idea. You're producing electricity 4 or 5 times the cost of other means, and to what end? Right. So you can thump your chest, say, I'm the governor of a state and I want to run for president, so I'm going to build offshore windmills. Right. It's just a virtue signaling tactic. Completely. Yeah. Completely. And at the expense of the American people. And not even the American people right now. It's the American people. They're paying on their energy bills. They're paying on their energy bills. Absolutely. That is true. But when we talk about the government spending that ends up in the debt, it's not the American people of right now. It's the American people of 2, 3, 4, 5
generations down the road, they are the ones actually picking up this bill because there's no way we can keep pace with the debt. Talked about getting more House Freedom Caucus members on these committees because that's where the work is done before it comes to the floor. We always talk about who has the majority, who has this, who has that, right? But it's those committees, it's representation on those specific committees that really, really matters how ultimately work is done on the floor. Heading into this election, House Freedom Caucus, I'm old enough to remember when you guys were just a bunch of loons out there in the wilderness. You didn't have anything going on. You all were, R plus 30 districts, and you could be as conservative as you want because your base stood with you. Now you guys are in a position where you've grown your membership and you are inserting yourself into competitive races. Alaska at large. New Mexico 2, I believe, is another one. And we also have Joe Kent in Washington. I mean, these are ways that the House Freedom Caucus is looking to expand their representation come November 5th. How do you feel about those races? Why are those races particularly important for enacting those conservative policies?
Well, you're absolutely right. So we have to go into districts that are competitive districts. And the people in those competitive districts, they're like all the other Americans. I mean, they want to see a sane government in Washington, but you have to make the case to them. Right. So, for instance, let's take Scott Perry, our former chief. They drew him, Pennsylvania Democrats drew him into a district that's highly competitive. Now, he wins every time. I believe he's going to win this time. Close race, very close race. But he goes and he expounds our conservative principles in his district, which voted for Joe Biden last time, and he wins because it's the message of what I call fiscal sanity. I mean, if you go to the average person, so look, we're borrowing $2 trillion a year. How long do you think that can last? The average person goes, well, it can't last. Okay, well, send me to Washington because I actually think this is an important issue. That resonates with people. And swing district or not, that resonates with people. So I look forward to getting, you mentioned 3 of the districts where if those people get elected in those 3 districts, it's probably by 2%.
Right.
It is close. In those 3 cases, they all make excellent members. I think they'll know how to, maintain the ability to be reelected while maintaining conservative principles. We're adhering to conservative principles. But we do have to. For instance, we don't have a member on the Ways and Means Committee. Now we're going to discuss a huge new tax proposal. It would be great to have a Freedom Caucus member on Ways and Means.
Yeah. You mentioned Congressman Perry, one of your colleagues. He was Freedom Caucus chair. Then it went to Congressman Bob Good, who has since been primaried and will be leaving Washington at the end of this term. Right. You are now House Freedom Caucus chair. You look at their leadership styles, very, very different. What is your leadership style in this last final push during the election cycle, and how do you take that and project it forward?
Sure. So again, and we're in the situation where I believe in the end of the year, we obviously have the Republican majority for the rest of this Congress. I think we're going to have a Republican majority and hopefully the Senate presidency. I think that gives us a lot of leverage, as we've already spoken about. And I think we have to push the Speaker to use that leverage to advance the most conservative position.
Sorry, but what's your relationship like with Speaker Johnson? I mean, he's been in Washington a few years too.
Yeah, look, I've known the Speaker since he was elected. He was elected after I was elected, but yeah, I've known him. We have a good relationship. But we trust each other, and I think that's important. You have to have the ability to trust. You may not always agree on everything, but if Speaker Johnson looks me in the eye and says something, I expect him to follow through on it. And if he looks at me at the eye and I say something, I got to follow through on it because I just think that's the way it works best in terms of advancing what we need to do. I think that we have the ability to get a lot of wins, but I'm going to define wins a little differently. To me, that bill that last week, the SAVE 6-month CR, that's a win for us. We were able to talk in front of the American people about the importance of the SAVE Act for a couple of weeks. And where the average American probably goes, oh my God, really? Illegal aliens can, oh yeah, you look at our laws. And Democrats say, oh, laws are already in place. Except there are loopholes you could drive a truck through.
And also show me the immigration law that's being enforced under the current administration.
Yeah. It's right, because it's up to a state. Yeah. State doesn't want to do it. Now, this law now says, wait a minute, your state doesn't do it. There are actually penalties to a state, that refuse to do it.
But I can't help but notice when rubber hit the road on CR plus SAVE Act, there were members of House Freedom Caucus that decided to go the other way. Yeah. You voted in favor of the CR plus SAVE Act. I mean, how do you mitigate those differences in the House Freedom Caucus? What are the sources of disagreement when you approach issues like that?
Sure. So my philosophy is, and again, because I've been in it since the beginning, is in the beginning it was we can have diversity of thought, but when we come to a position, we have to have unity of action, and we have to be willing to say, look, we're a band of brothers and sisters. When we decide we're going to go to battle on an issue, we have to go to battle together. And we know you may not feel with us exactly the same on this, but we need to do it. We need to reinstill that, because that's what made us so successful in the beginning, is that we adhere. Again, we respect everybody's opinion, but in the rare instances, and there aren't too many instances where we take a position, we're going to battle. And we're going on the field, and if we don't go together, it's like I was in the military. It's like a military unit operating. Everybody, you may not agree with what the order was, but you got to do it. You're there to fulfill that.
Yeah. Final question for you.
Yeah.
Let's say Republicans do take House, Senate, White House. There's been a lot of pieces from the House, pieces of legislation from the House that have been passed more conservative than I can remember in my lifetime. H.R. 2, SAVE Act, etc. If you had to choose one, all right, January 3rd, we get back in. Let's get this on Trump's desk by the 20th when he's inaugurated. What piece of legislation are you?
H.R. 2.
H.R. 2.
It's incredible. Look, we have to close the border. It's a humanitarian issue with the fentanyl deaths. It's just a criminal issue with the criminals going through. We have to close the border. We do need the SAVE Act before the next election. There's no question about it. We have to ensure the integrity of American elections, and we will need the SAVE Act. But we can wait a little while to get that done. Look, the bus left the station for this election. Sorry it did. I wish it didn't. But we need H.R. 2 badly. We need that border highly controlled. In fact, I even say shut it down for a while until we get this all fixed.
Well, you have to go vote. Hopefully you'll be voting on that piece of legislation soon.
Yep.
Congressman Andy Harris, thank you for joining the Signal Sitdown.
Great to be with you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sitdown. Before you go, be sure to hit like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review. We not only love your feedback, but it really does help the show. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works. See you next time.